Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're coming from. I'm joining you from Melbourne, and I'd just like to thank you very much for spending your time with me today, and also to the full Prezi team for inviting me to host this webinar. My hope today in looking from crib to classroom high quality inclusion practices is to share a few ways that we can consider ways that we work in teams and how that teamwork can support high quality inclusion for children up to school age. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation as the custodians of whose country I am based. I acknowledge their ongoing connection to country and pay respect to their elders past and present. I extend that acknowledgement and respect to all First Nations peoples throughout Australia and across the areas that you yourselves are joining this webinar from today. So as Denise shared, I am Dr. Sam Vlcek. And yes, it is always Sam, not Samantha. It's just one of those things that have sort of continued since my childhood and just how I see myself as this person who is so fortunate to have had so many wonderful experiences. I am a lecturer in inclusive education at RMIT, and I'm exceptionally proud to be the inaugural RMIT University and Noah's Ark Inclusive Education Fellow. My research focuses on collaborative engagement between educators, allied health professionals, and parents, as well as evidence-based inclusive practices for children with disability. I have been a classroom teacher and I've also been a learning diversity advisor prior to entering the tertiary setting. And personally, I am a mother of two incredible children, and I have had the pleasure of experiencing how navigating the education system as a parent of children with disability looks, and some of the wonderful things that come from those experiences, and also some of the barriers that have presented over time, and how I'm able to look at different ways of working and being in trying to facilitate opportunities for all. I share this with you because I've sat at so many sides of the table, and I recognize the different emotions and constraints that come with each of those positions. Being the parent advocating for your child is a gift, and it has been exhausting. Being the educator trying so hard to support every single child while also maintaining the expectations of all involved is rewarding, and it can be exhausting. I've not been in an allied health role or an intervention specialist role specifically, but I have been involved as a learning diversity advisor, which has provided a completely different lens on a situation. Supporting a team to understand a child's strengths and needs is critical, and it too can be exhausting. No side of the table is easy. So my goal in my research and in my practice is to look at how we collectively acknowledge barriers while also recognizing the potential of what we can achieve when we teach and learn from one another as a team around a child. So the session's focus today are really, when I was thinking about what inclusive practices would I share with each of you and what are the key ones that sort of stick out to me, I always get brought back to the biggest benefits I've seen through each of those different lenses as a parent, as an educator, or as a support person is the outcomes that are achieved through the teams that I've been involved. So I thought today we could have a look at high quality partnerships. And I want to share with you the individual and team attributes of research that influence collaborative engagement, and also have a discussion on the importance of involving children within a team. So just for a second, I'd like you to think about what brings you here today. Our collective commitment to inclusion unites us, but individually, we all have our unique reasons for joining today's session. For me, I come to share my knowledge and work for the betterment of all children and the teams of people working to support every child. I work in this space and I'm privileged to work with some of the best people researching and leading the fields of both early childhood intervention and inclusive education. My ultimate goal, though, is to facilitate practices that enable every child to receive the developmental and educational outcomes and opportunities that they deserve. All of that sounds so basic and so so fundamental that it should be clear. But what I've worked through personally and professionally over the last few years is recognizing how difficult it can actually be to sit back and reflect on different situations and look at myself and how do I approach different situations to get the most out of it. So what I'm hoping to do today is for us to, for hopefully for everyone to walk away a little bit thinking more about who is it that I am as a member of a team and what can I do to strengthen the opportunities of the children at the centre of the support that I'm trying to work in. So high quality inclusion begins with high quality collaborative partnerships. Before we begin, I'd just like for you to initially think about some of the most productive partnerships you've experienced as a member of a team around a child. Have a think about the outcomes for the child, but also the personal satisfaction or experiences that you yourself gained within that team. I'd also like for you to consider a situation that you might have experienced that led to a less than ideal partnership. And that could be for any reason. It's not necessarily about assigning fault or blame, but actually acknowledging that there is an opportunity that might not have actually come to fruition in the same way that you thought it might. As we know, the child exists at the intersection of their varied environments and alongside the people they interact with across each of those aspects of their lives. Effective collaborative partnerships also lead to greater continuity of care, consistency across environments, and productive opportunities and outcomes for children with disability or additional needs. And these three outcomes are so critical to how any child is able to experience their environment and also have the opportunities to learn and to grow, to participate, and to become the unique, perfect individual that they are. When we view team engagement, we often consider a balanced intersection of all contributors to a child's development. But we know that relationships and partnerships are not usually linear, and varied factors influence individual and collective approaches to engaging with a team around a child. Some of these known barriers that influence disengagement or misalignment within a team include developing and maintaining positive connections with team members. We're all humans, and sometimes it can be really difficult to form those relationships that are sustainable, practical, and effectual. At times, we also come across barriers where people act in isolation or they aren't able to consistently approach the team and the support that they offer in the way that we ourselves perceive the team's guiding principles to be. And the big one across all environments are the limitations on time, money, and resources. When we think of those barriers, we can see that they can lead to low team engagement. So instead of, really highly tight, collaboration and intersections across different people involved in a child's development, we can see that pulling apart. We also can end up in a situation where there's misaligned engagement, where, two or more individuals supporting a child might be highly engaged, but for any reason, a carer or an educator or an intervention specialist themselves might not be actively involved in that team engagement. We also run into situations where there is no engagement at all. That level of engagement has a direct impact on the child and their opportunities to receive continuity of care, consistency across environments, and the positive outcomes that come from those approaches. So I'd like to share with you today one of the frameworks that's developed through my research and the different attributes of an individual and the team that really impact how engaged different individuals can be when they're supporting a student or a child. The first of which is the individual attribute of an attitude. So this is solely about a single person and how their mindset which relates to their willingness to teach and learn from other team members, as well as their expectations, such as their motivation to support the strengths, needs, and the abilities of the child at the centre of the support, how that influences an individual's ability to work within a team. At times, some of the barriers that can come from that look at viewing the child as something to fix rather than as someone who deserves supports and opportunities to grow. And it's really important that we consider not just what those elements are, but what are some of the barriers that might come. So if you're unsure of the benefits of collaborative teamwork, it's much harder to work within a team. If your focus is on solving issues rather than approaching the support from a strength-based lens and looking at ways to understand the child better, that will also often lead to disengagement within a team. At an individual level, we can always work to understand the motivations and expectations of ourselves, but also of our team members, and trying to meet them where they're at. This introspective reflection on what are you doing well yourself and what can you do to seek to understand others really influences the impact of the teams in which you work. It might seem really simple to think about your own attitude, but it can actually be quite hard when you start to think of, well, what is your mindset about this? And what are the different expectations that you yourself have on what you're going to achieve? And when that doesn't necessarily align with someone else's expectations and their attitude, it can create that disengagement. But what I'm really hoping for you to think about here is you yourself only have the opportunity to look at your own. The second individual attribute is around capacity, and it encompasses knowledge such as the awareness and trust in your own or the child and team members' strengths, needs, expertise in areas of specialisation. It's also around the availability, having the requisite time, flexibility, and reliability to dedicate to collaborating with team members. And it also comes down to your actions. How are you able to genuinely implement, review, and provide feedback upon the actions that you've agreed to implement within your space and within your portfolio in supporting the child? And how does that connect in with what you've agreed to with the team? Some of the barriers, when it comes to an individual's capacity are around siloed approaches to one or more of the team members. So working in your area of specialisation without that approach of really looking to go, well, hey, what can I learn from you that I can implement in my practice? And what can I share with you that you might choose to implement in your own? Limitations on time to connect with team members certainly impacts an individual's capacity to collaborate. And also sometimes having unrealistic or unachievable expectations of yourself and others within a team, such as thinking that everything's going to be actioned immediately and we're going to see results. Because having that expectation of yourself or of others often leads to disappointment and often not recognizing how long things do take to actually see the fruits of all of our wonderful labor. So some of the key strategies in supporting your own capacity and understanding that of others is acknowledging the constraints and barriers that are or might be impacting a team member's contribution to the team, and really being open in different ways to open up opportunities to collaborate. Bring it back to my own experiences, I really find this aspect of capacity really interesting because at different times, my life hasn't been linear. There have been ups, there have been downs, and my ability to actually contribute time to working with others has changed. My flexibility to do it in person or over the phone or via email has changed. So considering those different factors of yourself, it's also important to really seek to understand what are the opportunities or perhaps barriers that you might not know and you might never know about that might be influencing someone else's availability, but also then your perception of their prioritization that might not actually be in alignment with what they're actually able to achieve at that point in time. The third attribute of the individual within a team are their qualities. So their beliefs, which encompass things like how they value diversity and their understanding and beliefs of the value of a team approach. These are really critical things because not everyone sees things in the same way. Not everyone comes from the same area of expertise that you do or has the same initial understanding of what diversity might look like and how a team approach might be able to facilitate better outcomes for a child. The dispositions of the individual and their responsiveness and their agility to meet the needs of the team, as well as the individuals within the team, also influence the level of engagement that a person is able to contribute. Some of the barriers that come from individual qualities, and it's quite funny when we think about this because I know that being part of this group means that we all are really quite committed to inclusion and supporting all children, but not everyone's at the same part of this journey. And having an expectation around having everyone meet you where you're at often leads to disappointment, and understanding that some deficit-based perspectives are there and it's an opportunity for you to understand that that is where someone else is at the moment. But also, how can you smooth it through to help show them how we can transition to a more strength-based approach and the beautiful outcomes that come from when we support all children. The approaches of team members with really fixed views of actions and adjustments that they're willing to address. We've all been there and hoping that somebody on the other side of the table is willing to do more than what we believe that they're capable of doing. So it's really again about that introspection of going, okay, I need to meet them where they're at, and see what we can actually achieve here rather than pushing anything further than what's actually possible at this point in time. So those key strategies are around maintaining a strengths-based approach, irrespective of all of the different things that might come up, especially when discussing the child and their strengths and areas requiring support. It's such a blessing to be able to be a model of the terminology and language and approaches to inclusive practice. But it can be difficult when you're coming up across those things, but it's about being true to yourself. And where you can, gently highlighting the benefits of working together to support the child, as well as all others in the same environment. When it comes to the attributes of a team that either facilitate engagement in productive partnership or disengagement of that partnership, there are three different aspects of alignment. The first looks at the roles and responsibilities of the team. And we know that team members who co-develop their roles and responsibilities often have greater success at engaging in productive collaboration. In where team members are satisfied with their place in their team, they're usually more committed and capable of fulfilling their individual roles. The motivation of the team and having confidence in one another and their commitment to the child at the centre of the support is crucial. Having a team that is motivated to support the child because they believe in proactive supports creates that greater engagement and that greater cohesion across members. The actions of the team contribute to when they contribute to proactive action planning and problem solving, supports greater outcomes as well as consistency in the implementation of agreed upon actions across environments. Common barriers to this alignment, though, are reactive approaches to identify and meeting strengths as students' strengths, children's strengths and needs. And so this can be around looking at going, oh, here's a problem to fix again. So that individual mindset that can infiltrate the core constructs of a team can really create a misalignment. Hierarchical approaches to goal setting. And this is a really interesting one because we know as educators that we are the ones that have the most autonomy in the educational setting in most instances. As a parent or a carer, we're the ones that create the environment in the home setting. And as an intervention specialist in the different settings that you yourselves work, you're the ones that create that environment. And it can be really quite difficult to sit back and go, well, what is it that someone else is hoping to bring to this team that might mean that I change my practices, even though I am the one that has the greatest influence over that environment. So being really open to seeing yourselves as equal partners and looking at what's practical across environments really contributes to that extent of alignment. So the key strategies there are about respecting diverse ideas and approaches. The whole benefit of working in a multidisciplinary team is that you don't all have the same knowledge. You don't all come from the same aspect of focus, but you all have the opportunity to learn from one another. Being open to understand the limitations on team members and finding creative solutions and opportunity is also another really key strategy to you yourself being committed to aligning yourself with the others within the team to get the most out of the time that you have together. The final team attribute is characteristics. So the first one is around interaction processes. So the regularity of collaboration between all team members and the respect for the individual constraints on team members' availability as well. Developing clear protocols for communication and for responding to difficulties need to be clear and consistent. Not everything's going to work as planned. People will, unfortunately, have things that come up that mean that they might not be able to contribute to a discussion or something in the way that they originally intended, but being open and having some practices in place that provide a safe space for people to share the difficulties that they're experiencing and why things might not have gone to plan without fear of retribution or that they've let the whole team down is really critical to ensuring that the team is able to function cohesively, for a long period of time. Also, the aspect of relationships. We know in all aspects of our lives that relationships are critical, but within a team, having opportunities to develop positive rapport amongst one another is so important, and ensuring that those relationships build upon a place of genuine respect, trust, and value for each member. When it comes to those characteristics, there are of a team, there are barriers in when things are sometimes within and with outside the control of the members of the team. And they come usually through irregular communication, the exclusion of team members from discussions and decisions, as well as negative past experiences. If you've worked with somebody before and you haven't felt respected or you haven't felt valued or you haven't seen them contribute in the way that you thought, that is naturally going to, make you more cautious about contributing to that team again. But acknowledging those things can also be a real gift in supporting yourself to be able to make it through that part and get to a point where you're able to have a clean, fresh start, knowing that you are all there for the same goal in supporting that child. Some of those key strategies are to genuinely respect all members of a team, their ideas and their contributions, and being able to modify the approaches or team protocols and approaches as necessary. Life isn't linear. We all have bumps in the road, and so do teams. And understanding the different constraints on those individuals can also help shape a team that's constantly evolving into something that works for all as much as possible. Beyond that, beyond all of the team members, it's also critical that we make sure that we include the child within the team. Advancing child voice, agency, and autonomy is critical for helping children themselves show you their strengths, interests, and personal ambitions in order to actually guide the development of goals that matter to them, adjustments that they're wanting to work with, as well as the processes for supporting them to achieve their unique potential. Children, as we know, are much more perceptive and intuitive than we often realise. As I've shared with you, I am a parent to two beautiful children. I have an incredible 16-year-old son who's currently in year 12. So it's been a little while since he was at kindergarten. But one of the things that set me into the journey of researching within the field of inclusive education were actually my experiences with him. And I'll share with you just one anecdote from when he was in kindergarten. I actually went to an incredible kindergarten with educators that I was so blessed to have known and learnt from. And I remember he was there for about 2 months, and I loved the setting. It was out in the country, so it was full of beautiful trees and lots of, nature based opportunities. And I remember getting a call one day from his kindergarten teacher asking if I could, come in after the next session and have a chat with her. That next 24 hours was just full of so much anxiousness. What's happening? What's going on? Is he okay? Is something wrong? Has he done something? All of those things that go through my mind, that any parent's mind, any person's mind, really. And she she sits me down the next day and, we start talking about how he's going, and he's, been showing a lot of progress with, cutting up fruit, and really enjoys playing in the sandbox, but really isn't interested in joining in with group activities. He's, he socializes with children positively, but he is also not really interested in team-based games or contributing to different small group activities that other children are involved. Instantly, I just feel overwhelmed. I just feel like, okay, what is it that I've done wrong? What's something I've missed? Have I missed something? Is there a need of which I haven't had met? He was already involved in speech pathology and occupational therapy on a regular basis, but what have I, as his parent, not seen and not supported adequately? So, of course, I leave that meeting and speak to his speech pathologist and his occupational therapist about what was being evidenced at kindergarten. We organised for them to go and contribute to different sessions where they would go and observe him and interact with him in that environment. So we really formed this instantaneous team where we had different sort of structural things in place to be able to, understand where he's currently at and hopefully get to a point where we can develop some goals to support him. Anyway, about a month later, after those observations had taken place, all of us met together. And I still remember sitting there feeling so fearful that something that would be said that I had done wrong as a parent, or something that I hadn't done enough of. Anywho, we're all sharing notes and our experiences with Ash, and there wasn't anything that anyone was able to identify as to, why he wasn't contributing to those things. The teachers were fantastic at opening up the opportunity for him to contribute, but yet he still chose not to. His therapists were able to see that, his expressive communication in that environment was definitely lower than what they saw in their own settings. There wasn't really any indicator as to, what was going on that would perhaps contribute to that to the extent of which we were seeing. All of these things were about really great to acknowledge where he was currently at. And we started to trial a whole range of different strategies, with maybe I remember starting up with partner groups and, different things. And that I would come in for the last 15 minutes of sessions and contribute to a group activity. And he still wouldn't contribute. He still wouldn't stay. He still wouldn't do the art activity. Anyway, it was a couple of weeks later, and I get a call from his teacher, and she's like, Sam, and I'm like, yes. She's like, Sam, Ash, we've just put out all of these highly skilled logic puzzles, and he's just sat there and done each and every single one of them. When I picked him up that day, I asked him, like, what did you do at kinder today? What were your favorite parts? And he was like, finally had an activity I wanted to do. So all of this support that we were trying to wrap around him, because we saw his approaches as being something unusual or something that he was limited by, was actually him just filling his time with something he enjoyed until he had the opportunity to experience a challenge. There wasn't anything wrong. There wasn't anything that we did. There was actually nothing there except for us to give him the time and space and the opportunities that met his needs. Having that experience and then working through thinking about that, with his kindergarten teacher and with his therapist, gave us a whole new insight into Ash and into who he was as a learner, as a person, and it has continued to frame so much of how I parent him now myself, and how it's easy for me to say now, but how I can sit back sometimes and go, okay, there isn't necessarily a problem here, but it's just something that we need to provide more opportunities for the child themselves to actually have a look at. What is it that they are wanting out of an environment? What is it that perhaps it's not that we're not doing, but we're not open to seeing yet? So for me, that's been a really big part of my own learning journey, in thinking that I myself, all of who I am and my beliefs, sometimes need to take a step back and just being really open to letting the child themselves, work for who they are and demonstrate what it is that they're trying to get out of a situation as well. So thank you so much for joining today. I'd just like to open it up if anyone has any questions. Right.
Hi, Sam. It's Kerry Bull here. I'll help with managing the chat room, and I can see that Chris has put a question up. Sam, I'm really enjoying the session. Thank you. And I'm wondering if your research touched on the impact of inclusive practices caused by broader systemic issues of education, health, and disability services, not collaboratively as a team around the child.
Oh, thank you for that question, Chris. And it was really interesting actually preparing this webinar. Like I said, it was going to be framed as inclusive practices. And then for me, it was really about, well, until we can know what are the best practices for a child, we first need to know how are the people working with the child, how do we work effectively. But my research that I've shared today around the dynamic influences of collaborative engagement is just one piece of a broader puzzle of where that sits within the broader education system. So what are the facilitators and barriers across each of the different aspects of the system? So the jurisdiction, so for me, myself, in Victoria, it's the Department of Education that facilitates kindergarten programs. But for the NDIS, it's also the Department of Health at a federal level. So looking at all of those levers that influence the support and the prioritisation of how people work together and to implement inclusive practices across the education system is a massive part of what I do. And it's some of the core work that I'm very privileged to do with Noah's Ark as well.
Thanks, Sam, for that comprehensive answer. Everyone, please feel free to put questions in the chat room and we'll attend to them. Anu has got a question here for you, Sam, about how can schools truly commit to inclusion when a child's behaviours are challenging or even aggressive? Often the response is to shorten the school day, but we know this doesn't solve the problem. What practical strategies can schools adopt to support both the child and classroom without excluding the student or exhausting the staff?
Oh, that's a great question, Anu. And challenging behaviour or children who are demonstrating dysregulation can be something that often we see schools unintentionally looking at from a reactive position. So what do we do once something happens? So first of all, it's really stripping it back to what are the proactive supports that we can put in place? What is the behaviour trying to communicate? And how do we reach out for support? I am a firm believer in the value and the utility of everyone involved in the development and support of a child, whether it be through their time in early childhood settings or within schools, but also knowing it's okay to not know everything. And in many cases, in supporting children's behaviour, it can be quite intimidating and overwhelming for teachers to feel as though they need to understand exactly what to do at every point. And this is where I think that the role of allied health in schools is so critical, and having the opportunity as a school leader or as a jurisdiction leader to ensure that there's greater access to occupational therapists and speech pathologists and psychologists and a whole range of professionals to actually get in there and to be able to understand the individual child. I know this is a really long-winded answer in essentially saying that it's really about trying to get the most specialist knowledge to understand that child, and to put a plan in place that's going to be that proactively supports them. When situations do happen, obviously there's a duty of care to a child, as well as all other children, but the ultimate goal should always be having the child at school for the entire length of the day and genuinely included in all education opportunities as well.
Thanks, Sam. Thumbs up from Anu, thumbs up from all of us. We know that children's social, emotional, behavioural difficulties can often be the trigger for exclusionary practices. So that's good for us to talk about. Please pop more questions in. But while we're waiting for questions to come up in the chat, I've got a question for you, Sam, if you don't mind. I'd really like to hear about the way in which you talked about developing protocols for team work. Can you give us any ideas about how you go about those protocols and what's important to have within those protocols?
Yeah, thank you, Kerry. So developing protocols isn't about creating a set of rules as such, but when you initiate a new team, or even if you're in an established team that isn't perhaps working as effectively as you believe that it could, it's about going, okay, really sitting down and going, what are our key objectives? What are our goals as a team? Not about our goals for, what we're going to place onto the child, but actually for working together. Is it realistic for us to be meeting once a week? Or is it more around having ad hoc meetings with, regular email communication? So for different people, those protocols are going to look very different. It's also about being really looking at the different cultural and linguistic needs of the people in the team as well. So if you have families that you aren't seeing necessarily interact as much as you would think that they would like to, or that you would hope for their involvement to be, it could be something around actually needing a translator. It could be something about looking at the different times of days that work for them and their schedules. So it's not a one size fits all approach, and it's meant to be a really fluid process of acknowledging what is going to work at different points of time, whether that be based on availability or points of critical and intensive support, but really just sort of coming up with a system that works for each of you. So for myself, at times it's been having a fortnightly meeting with my child's teacher and well, in one situation, their speech pathologist, and looking at different strategies and just keeping in touch throughout the week as needed. And at other times, it's been solely around email communication, except for a single meeting with myself and a teacher at different time points. So there's not really a framework for it, but it's about looking at what's actually practical and what are the different strategies that you can use that are going to best meet the needs of the situation and all of the individuals within a team.
Thanks, Sam. That's answered the question beautifully. The protocol's not a set of rules, but rather just a way of working together, but clearly defining that at an individual level. We've got more questions coming in, so I'll go to Alicia first, who's asking, do you have any recommendations on how to support a team approach to inclusion within schools who do not permit allied health practitioners to attend on site?
Oh, Alicia, that is definitely something I actually speak to a lot of schools about at the moment. My dream would be for every school to be very open to having as much allied health support on site as possible. And unfortunately, there are so many constraints and barriers to that. So again, I think it's around thinking about your own set of protocols there. Are they open to having virtual meetings? In person can sometimes be ideal, but we're fortunate to live in a world now where we have access to virtual technologies to allow us to meet in sort of hybrid ways. Is that an option? Is it that the school doesn't want to interact at all? That's a much greater level of difficulty if that's the case, and it's because you then often have the carer as this sort of centre person with everything feeding between, rather than having the opportunity to meet together. So I think the first step is speaking to whoever your main contact is, whether that's the parent or the carer of the child, and seeing what they can facilitate for what options are actually available. Is it that email communication is acceptable, but virtual meetings are not? Having a look at what your options are and then trying to see how you can frame up something that best meets the needs of the child would be the first step.
Thanks, Sam. And now we've got a question from Semma, an early childhood educator, who's thanking you for the session and asking questions about what inclusive strategies can we implement to effectively support both children with additional needs and their typically developing peers. And Semma's saying in her role, she's observed that educators often feel uncertain about how to bring these groups together in a cohesive and inclusive manner, and is particularly interested in approaches that not only promote genuine inclusivity, but also empower educators to confidently apply these practices in their daily interactions.
Oh, thank you for that question. And it is something that I get asked a lot, and I wish I had a magic answer. Unfortunately, a lot of it is around being really open to professional development, looking at different opportunities, such as coming to these webinars, and reading up on different strategies that ensure that you're able to implement the most appropriate strategies that meet the needs of every child. The reason why I can't give you a specific response is because the individual strengths and needs of every child is unique. So whether the child has a disability or whether they are, developing on a more, typical path, it's about really seeking to understand who is that hurt person and what is going to make them and all of their peers have the best opportunities to grow, to learn, and to develop. It it really is about having that mindset as a first path and being really vulnerable. I know that might sound really strange, but being vulnerable and going, it's okay that I don't know everything right now. It's okay that I don't know what practices, but I'm going to go out and seek them out. I'm going to go and find that information. I'm going to ask my centre director if there's the opportunity to invite some allied health into the setting to give us some strategies, to look at what we're currently doing and to give us some coaching opportunities to upskill and be able to create activities that do best align with the individual needs of every child in that classroom.
Mm. Thank you, Sam. And now a question from Annie, who's firstly saying that she's loving the reminder about child agency, but is wanting to know whether you have any ideas or strategies for allied health providers when some schools' leadership often are very reluctant to have providers come in. And is there any specific research that might help to demonstrate how working collaboratively is effective and how to help them see we want to work all together? Understanding that they have time constraints as we do. So how do we help them to see the value in opening the door? Any ideas or tips would be terrific.
Oh, fabulous question again. I'm more than happy to share with the Pressy team and for them to share out some of the research that I've done in this space that can, perhaps give at least a little bit of an empirical tick towards the benefits of having allied health work in schools. And I think it comes back to those different constructs that we were speaking about before of the individual and recognizing that some people just aren't at that same point of understanding one, the benefits and the value of, allied health within schools and what that might actually come from. Sometimes that comes from a place of fear that it's going, to change, systems or processes quite substantially that won't be manageable or are untenable for a school. Other times it's in at the moment, especially schools being really conscious of the time the administrative tasks are taking for themselves and for their teachers and being not wanting to create an extra layer of activity. What I say to that, however, though, is yes, working with people does take time. Yes, time is, such a small, such an incredible resource that we have limited opportunity to have. But when we do work together, we are going to learn new things. It is going to put in a little bit more of an expectation on the things that we do. It is going to take time. It is going to take effort. But when we start reaping those benefits from that support, we then get to see, that time coming back to us because some of those challenges that we're often reacting to are now being proactively supported. So I guess the main thing is really trying to smooth it through, seek to understand where someone is at and not think that they're going to change overnight or that position's going to change, but coming at it really gently and really asking some questions. I'm keen to understand, what you've experienced with allied health before, and where you think that, perhaps over time this might be something that could be productive. Or I'm really hoping to share this with you and, perhaps see if there's something that you can offer. Can you offer a 15-minute burst of PD to the staff as something as a token of willingness that you're willing to give rather than them thinking that there's something that you're trying to take, and that's often taking back some time.
Lovely practical tips, Sam, and Tracy will send more information to people who are participating today so that we can follow that up. And I've just put in the chat the citation for your recent article that might help people too. We have a question that I have for you, Sam. You've got this focus about child voice and agency and autonomy you've talked about. Have you got any practical tips for us about how to really ensure that we're learning from children and including them in the team?
I think that the main thing is being really open to hearing them. And hearing them isn't necessarily about what they say, but how they're acting. And it can be difficult depending on the age of the child in having them sit at the table, as such in a physical sense, but being really cognizant of what are the different activities that they're doing, the things that they're saying that you're seeing is a priority to them, whether that be from the viewpoint of the parent or carer, or as the educator, or as the intervention specialist. What is it that you're seeing and seeing them interact and engage with that you can bring to that team conversation that promotes their own voice within the decisions that are being made, to ensure that we're not doing things upon a child, but with a child as well. And again, depending on the age and the level of interaction with the child, for me, the ultimate goal is always having that child, sit at that table as well and contribute to those conversations over time. And that might not be for every single interaction, but making sure that they're aware that everyone's there to support them. This isn't about us sitting somewhere, us being in a team trying to change you or improve you, or as I've unfortunately heard too many times, to fix you, but instead break down those barriers that are limiting your opportunities, to have the best possible experiences across each of those environments.
Mm. Thanks, Sam. My reflection on that is how much what you're talking about reflects the fundamental principles that are coming up in the new best practice framework for early childhood intervention about rights and about strengths and about an ecological approach, but also at the core, what you're talking about is relationships. So that's been great to hear. John, I'm wondering if you've got any comments. Are you there? Would you like to ask any questions or make any comments?
I am here, and I think so. I really just wanted to thank Sam again, and I think that the focus on how we build the relationship between teachers and parents as that sort of foundation then for the work that we do in early intervention, but more globally think about that is still an ongoing question, and it's a really interesting challenge for us in the work that we do. So I think that it's exciting to hear about Sam's work in that regard, because it is so critical to the success of really bringing the team back around the child and into the early years setting.
Any comment on that, Sam?
I just love hearing John talk. I'm not sure whether many of you have had the same pleasure, but every time I hear it, it makes me think of something else, and it sometimes it reinforces my beliefs and the my commitment to this space. And sometimes it also makes me think of, oh, okay, that's another great study that we can do, and how can we look at this through a different way as well. But thank you, John. You know, as always, your encouragement and support is so appreciated, and your advocacy of this space. Everyone here is so fortunate to be part of this wonderful group that Pressy has offered in really advocating for the rights of children and their strengths and needs, and for all contributors to have an opportunity to ensure the best possible outcomes for children. So thank you.
And I just add, Kerry, quickly, I mean, it's very exciting for all of us to have somebody who's an academic who is really wanting to focus in on this area of work. We need more of that in Australia.
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. I think we'd all agree about that. You can all see that there's a poll we're asking you to please complete before we finish up. I can see there's no more questions in the chat. Please put one in if you have one, but I might hand over to you, Denise.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry, and thanks, John, and particularly thanks, Sam. Thanks so much for all the information that you've shared today, and we will provide the recording and the information that you've spoken about. But it's such an important area for us to really get right with the children that we're working with. And look, I just thought I'd mention that so many of the things that, or the principles, I guess, that you mentioned today are principles that have been targeted within the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. You know, things like child-centred, relationship-based, rights-based, strengths-based. There were so many I was ticking off and thinking this is really good. You know, the lining up with what you're saying is really clear. So, and I thought I'd also mention, because I know we've got some early childhood educators here as well, that there is a resource that's coming out with the framework that is a document as well that's specifically targeting early childhood educators, and how we can, you know, how early childhood educators and early childhood intervention practitioners can work together. And I think that really highlights again what your talk was all about, that relationship, that the team, and the importance of that connection and collaboration. So thank you again, Sam, for not only sharing your wisdom here, but, you know, continuing to, I think, support this space on an ongoing basis here in Australia. So thank you very much.
No, thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you, everybody, for completing the poll. And yeah, we will certainly look at that and take that on board. So we hope you've enjoyed the day and have a great weekend.
Thank you all.
Thank you.